Vladimir Putin has won his fourth term as the Russian president. Exit polls in Russia show that Putin has won the presidency with 76.67% of the votes. Putin made a victory speech in front of his campaign headquarters in Moscow shortly after the exit poll results projected him as a clear leader. He called for national unity and said that he is not planning on making any constitutional reforms yet.
Перед нами стоят очень сложные, непростые задачи. И нам нужно не просто их решать, как обычно в текущем режиме, а нам нужно осуществить, я говорил об этом не случайно в послании, прорыв, рывок. Мы можем это сделать. У нас есть для этого все основания вот так считать и добиться такого результата. И нам очень важно, чтобы, когда мы будем это делать, чтобы различные политические силы руководствовались не групповыми интересами, не какими-то клановыми, а общенациональными.
While the official results are yet to be released, Putin's victory as president is no surprise. The former KGB spy has dominated Russian politics since the last 18 years. In the last presidential election, Vladimir Putin won 63.6% of the votes. Congratulatory messages from world leaders are coming in. President Xi Jinping of China says that Beijing is willing to work with Moscow to bring ties to a higher level. Xi Jinping said, and I quote, "Currently, the China-Russia Comprehensive Strategic Cooperative Partnership is at the best level in history, which sets an example for building a new type of international relations," unquote. And I'm joined by Julia Chapman, correspondent from Moscow. Julia, tell me, what does this mandate and what does this tenure of Vladimir Putin mean to the world?
Well, yes, it was a landslide result for the Russian president who has now won, as you said, his fourth six-year term as president of Russia. He won a record share of the vote compared to, it was about 65 million of Russia's eligible voters, and that was much higher, 56 million, which is much higher than the previous record, which was set by Dmitry Medvedev when he stood as president, so that President Putin could stand as prime minister to take a gap between his constitutional terms in office. So a landslide result for Putin, but the turnout was slightly damper than expected. It was around 68% of the vote, and they were hoping for something more like 70. So the slightly lower turnout than Putin's team had hoped for does sort of inflate the figure, the record figure of Putin's vote. But yes, it is a pretty strong mandate from the Russian voters for another term in office for Vladimir Putin.
Two very strong leaders, Xi Jinping from China and Vladimir Putin in Russia, they have got extended tenure. So, in your opinion, what sort of direction you expect Vladimir Putin to give to the Russian politics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we're wondering what the next 6 years will bring. It will probably be Vladimir Putin's last term in office, although, as I mentioned earlier, he did take a 6-year break when Dmitry Medvedev stood in as president during the time that he acted as prime minister. So after the next 6 years, who knows what's going to happen? He's definitely seen here in Russia as a very strong leader and someone that many people look up to and feel is the best person to see the country through what they see as very difficult times, very difficult relations with the rest of the world. But yes, as we've just seen, of course, in China with President Xi Jinping now abolishing any limits to his term or any president's term in China, it's possible that there could be some sort of sleight of hand from President Putin, although he did say yesterday after the election, after his speech after the result was announced, he did laugh off suggestions that he would run again, saying, "How long do you expect me to stay in power? Until I'm 100? So it's very likely that he will probably find a successor in the next 6 years. We don't know who that will be. There's no obvious suggestions of who that could be. There'll be a lot of jostling, a lot of maneuvering to see who could take his place, because there's no obvious choice as it stands.
Vladimir Putin is also expected to visit India soon. What sort of new policy direction do you think that Putin will give to when it comes to India? Because the relationship between India and Russia, Soviet Union at that point of time, was very, very close, like all-weather friends. But with emergence of a multipolar world, there was a bit of a dilution. So in your opinion, what sort of relationship do you expect for Putin to strike with India again?
Yes, I mean, he is expected to make a visit to India at some point in the near future, and he does, run on a platform of trying to improve relations with a lot of countries around the world, including India. And many people here in Russia say that they are voting for Putin because they want to improve relations with the rest of the world. Asia and Southeast Asia as well are areas that he has been focusing some of his policy on in recent times. It's a very big area of growth as Russia looks away from the West, where there have been more strained relations since the annexation of Crimea, since the particularly in a couple of recent weeks, when there have been issues, of course, with the relationship with Great Britain, as Great Britain accuses Russia of being behind the poisoning of Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in the British town of Salisbury. So there have been strained relations over that. Sanctions from the US, sanctions from the EU. It's all been very difficult for the Russian government, so they are definitely looking eastward and looking to strengthen relationships on the other side of the globe.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for joining us from Moscow.